Hi, I'm Oliver Gwynne, and this is Gin with Gwynne, where we talk about data, marketing, and this week, philosophy, because we're talking about the big other. Now, I assume that you're not coming to me for a detailed explanation of psychoanalysis terms, but the big other was coined by Jacques Lacan, and for our purposes, you only kind of need to know two things. The one is that the big other is the hypothetical I for which we perform. So it is often unwritten, unspoken rules of societies, of workplaces that we all obey. And while we might question them, we enter into that system, and that is the way that things are done. And often we take on the characteristics of the systems and the rules that we first enter into. And secondly, when talking about the big other, we're also talking about sort of the greater good for companies, specifically from the company's point of view. So doing something personally that's going to benefit the company, the big other in our situation. And I wanted to look at how that relationship has sort of changed throughout the last couple of 100 years. So when we look not so long ago in the great breadth of things, 300 years ago, the alignment between what is good for the company and what is good for you as an individual is very, very aligned. And the reason is quite obvious. If you're a blacksmith, your father was a blacksmith, your son or daughter will be a blacksmith. You often have a job for life, or you have one or two jobs over the course of your working life. And so it makes perfect sense that what is good for the company is good for you because you're going to have a very long-term relationship with that company, with the people, and with the culture that you're sort of inheriting. It makes sense that if you need to learn a new skill, that you would do that because it's going to benefit you in the long term and your employer. And in many cases, your employer might own the town that you work in. They might own the property that you're living in. They might build parks and churches and all of that good stuff. A great example of this, if you've ever been to Yorkshire, is Saltaire. That entire town is built around a factory, but one man basically built every single thing for his workers. Some might say that that's basically slavery with extra steps, but it's quite possible in that situation where, hey, that company does well, my boss will build a new nice park for us. I benefit very, very directly from that. And also just bear in mind that in society at this time, there's a very close alignment with the big other, not just in terms of religion, in terms of do good things and good things will happen with you, and religion is more at the forefront, but also from the point of view that everybody knows their place in society. The peasants don't talk to the nobility. Everybody knows where they are in society, what their role is, what their purpose is as well. And so while the work balance is sort of off, you're very closely aligned to your company and to your profession because it's not changing so often. And then we move forward to as recent as sort of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and personal autonomy rises. People can move around the company. There are more employees in general. There's more opportunities. And so the idea of a job for life stops happening. People can change jobs if they want to, but still they're having a relationship with their employer that tends to be 5, 10, 20 years. It's still not a small portion of their life. So we've still not got to the point where they can flip and change all the time. There's still a big other that says, well, you have to be nice to these people. You have to obey this set of rules because you're going to be around these people for a long time. And interestingly, the restrictions that we saw previously in the way that we work didn't go away. If anything, weirdly, in my point of view, is they become more restrictive or they become more predominant. So in a world where there's more autonomy and people can choose, and people start to say things like, hey, we want work-life balance, we want 9 to 5, we want vacations, we want minimum pay. Out of nowhere, companies start to inflict more rules and stipulations and more in your face ways of working and a whole culture that they sort of invent out of nowhere. And it becomes more restrictive in a way because the choice is there, but they decide, no, you're going to have to wear a shirt and tie every day. They decide that you're going to sit in a cubicle. And even when they give you a nicety like casual Fridays, gee whiz, we're going to let you wear whatever you want. It's going to be controlled by them. And so here the big other sort of changes. The big offer becomes career wise. And so you start doing what's good for the company less and less because at some level, because it's people that you're going to see for a long time, you certainly have a longer term relationship with the company. It still makes sense for you to do good things, but you start to question, well, why am I working late at night? Why am I giving up my personal time for my company? Why am I going above and beyond and not doing what's good for me? And so we start to see this concept where the reason that you do those things is because of career. It's going to be good for your career. Will a future employee see all of those things that you're doing? No. You could put them in your CV, I guess, but they're definitely not going to know these things. And so it never really quite makes sense. This idea that you are doing extra things or you are doing things that are good for your company because it's good for your career doesn't quite align perfectly in this period of time. But certainly if the company is successful and you are part of that success, you can share that externally. And so it might be better for you. You might get more success and join a bigger company with more prospects for yourself. But we start to see this concept of the reason that you are doing things for your company sort of splits. And it's partly because you have a relationship with them for a long time, but it's partly for yourself and your career. And that's the reason that you are sacrificing to some extent your own personal well-being. So let's fast forward one more time to very recent history. The pandemic happens. And sadly, to me, it takes a pandemic to break all of these norms around working culture, to make people really question, like, why do I need to dress smart? I can dress in my pajamas and still do my job. Why do I need to start at 9 and finish at 5 when I can work late if I prefer that? Why do I have to travel an hour in and an hour out to talk to people about work when I can do it over a Zoom call? All that technology was around for the last 15, 20 years, but it took the pandemic to break a lot of those norms and a lot of the rules that we were all part of and the function of the big other. And in terms of what's good for our company, that relationship has become very fractious. There's more opportunities for us today. It's much more likely that we will move jobs a lot more often than in previous generations. 2, 3 years is very normal. 5 years, very normal. 10 years at one company starts to become unnatural to a lot of people unless you are moving up in that company. But there are only so many jobs and only so many positions, and only so many people can move up. And so it becomes more normal for them to find an opportunity somewhere else. And so we have this slightly strange relationship with our companies these days where they want us bought in. They want us to be part of the vision. They want us to go on above and beyond and do what is good for them. But we are more selfish as a people, and they know that. And similarly, at times when they can more easily replace us because there's more people out there, there's more candidates out there, that relationship can change on a year-to-year and even month-to-month basis. You know, I doubt people like Facebook and Meta and all these kind of people, they hired a load of people, and certainly they wanted to foster a great working culture with them, a long-term relationship with them. But when their company suffers, they have to do mass layoffs, and they know that they can probably replace those people quite easily at the moments that they choose to do that because there's more people on the market, generally speaking. And so our work-life balance has changed, and the emphasis is more on life and less on work at certain points in our career. Certainly when you're starting your career, you're more likely to do things that are good for the company and try and get up the ladder as quickly as possible. But when you get to a certain point where you are comfortable and you know that you can get another job with ease, there becomes less reason to do that. And so why do you do that? What is the big other in today's modern society? I think it's still career based. It's still generally career. But it's also tied into social and influence and work influence, which you could say that I'm a part of because, hey, I'm here doing this. And it doesn't necessarily directly benefit the company that I'm working for today, but have a longer term ambition of mine so that you know what I'm thinking and feeling and my thoughts and opinions. And maybe you think that those things are good and you decide in the future that you should listen to what I'm doing and hire my company or hire me. Who knows? So we're now participating in this different big other, which is playing a different game, a social media game, a LinkedIn game, where if we contribute to professional society more often, if we give away our tips for free, if we give away our advice and share our best practices and stories by participating and following these rules of etiquette, we can benefit ourselves more indirectly than ever before. But the idea is certainly that if we do these things, it will benefit our careers. And so our big other, as changed from being very closely aligned to our companies and maybe more closely aligned with our personal ambition. And the reason that we choose to go and do things for our company is because there's been a success at that company. They've successfully sort of converted us to thinking about what's good for them, being brought in on that mission. So if you're a company and you're thinking, well, I want to inspire that behavior in my people, and this is especially important if you're a small, medium-sized enterprise. How do I get people to really like my company, to be bought in, to want to stay there 5, 10 years when it is now definitely against the grain, against the norm? The first thing I would say is get rid of things that do not make sense. Get rid of these stupid rules that nobody knows why they exist, that there is not a good reason for existing. Get rid of them. There's no excuse anymore. If you are going to insist that people be in the office 5 days a week, why? What's your strong reason for that? And if there isn't a really strong reason, don't do it. Give people the flexibility. As long as they get their work done, okay. I like a mix of the two. I like to go into the office, and I think you have some really good collaboration on a day-to-day basis that you just don't get on a Zoom call, but you don't need to do that every single day for most businesses, in my opinion. So unless there's a really strong reason for a particular rule, for an unwritten rule in particular, tell your people they don't need to obey those things. Say, hey, you don't need to write so formally, or you don't need to obey these etiquettes that maybe you have done before. In our company, we want you to focus on what is important, which is X, Y, and Z, and not focus on all of these things. The second thing is try and accommodate, where practical, individuality. So if somebody prefers to work at night and it doesn't affect other people, try and accommodate that wherever possible. The aim should be to get the most out of people whilst balancing at the same time what is good for the company. And it's a tricky balance, and it can only be done on an individual basis. And that's where you really need managers to understand their people, and to understand, why are they with you in particular? Where do they see themselves in the future? Can your company realistically accommodate that? And in many cases, the answer might be no. And if the answer is no, how can you make sure that they're in a position to take advantage of future opportunities with you? How can you have an honest and frank conversation, which is, okay, maybe you're not going to be here in 5 years' time. How can we get you to that place where you're ready to leave? And in the meantime, how can we make sure that you do what's good for us? Try and directly join together what is good for the company and what is good for you beyond bonuses, beyond pay rise, because pay rise, however nice they might be, at the time where inflation is really high and cost of living is really high, okay, your budget might be a 10% bonus, and normally a 10% bonus might be amazing. But if the cost of living's gone up by 20%, then that doesn't really matter. It doesn't have the impact that you might want. And so you have to really think about, how can I help people on their professional journeys? How can I give them benefits that will matter to them? If they are a new parent, maybe I can accommodate a salary sacrifice for more holidays, all of these kind of things. And so that was a very brief overview of our relationship with our companies and the reason that we would do more for the company, the big other that benefits the benefit of the company, which today has been dissolved to the point of view where the company is having to do more and more work on that. Why do you go the extra mile for your company? Is it because you have been brought up to believe that it is the norm, that it is just part of daily life, and that by doing that you get some sort of indirect benefit? Quite possibly the answer is yes. But today, those questions become more prevalent in a society where we're putting mental health and personal well-being at the forefront, because employees can change, but your own personal health is everlasting. So those have been my thoughts for the week. A bit of a heavy subject this time. Comment below, let me know if you like this kind of thing. And thanks for joining me on Gin with